Today, we're going to be talking about developing fair, consistent, and transparent grading practices. And each professor has policies that reflect their own beliefs about students' learning and motivation and success. And the grading policies can vary across campus. They can vary within individual departments and even between instructors in the same department teaching the same course. And faculty are using practices that they think are fair, and often there might be some challenges or disparities associated with them. So we want to talk about techniques that you can use to make sure that your practices are fair and consistent and are fair across all the different types of students that we have. And my name is Yvonne Johnson, and I work in the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning as the multimodal teaching coordinator. I work with professors who teach in face-to-face, online, accelerated 16-week, blended weekends, all kinds of different formats of delivery, online and in person. I've taken classes like that as a student and teach them as an instructor. I teach doctoral level research courses for the College of Health and Human Sciences for their interdisciplinary health sciences program. And so if you could each share your information, you can either put it in the chat or you can turn on your microphone and share your department, your division, your role at NIU, and what you hope to get out of the workshop. That would be great. And we do this as a part of building communities. So does anyone want to share using the microphone?
Sure, I'll do it. This is Bill Goldenberg.
Okay. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I teach music and I teach piano, which is somewhat subjective. You'd have to agree. And so making fair grading, what I do, the best I can do, it can't be perfectly fair. It's not right or wrong answers to anything. But what I do is I do give the students a rubric or a kind of list of how to teach themselves and what to listen for when they're practicing or when they're teaching another student. And I measure them kind of with that same rubric. So it's about as fair as I can figure out to be. But if you have other ideas, I'd be happy to hear them. But unfortunately, it's not an objective thing like science or mathematics is a little more objective, I guess. But
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Okay. And then, so Natalie says she's from the Special Education Department and Associate Professor, and you're here to learn more about making your courses more accessible and fair to all of your students. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you, Natalie. Alicia, did you want to share your introduction either with your microphone or in the chat? Okay.
I'm Alicia. I am recently appointed to visiting professor, but I had been here last term as an adjunct in the biomedical engineering program. And I'm interested in understanding what constitutes fair grading, especially in the context of say accommodations and changing deadlines or extending deadlines to be what I think, to give them what I think may be more flexibility, but just want to make sure that somehow it's not being, it can't be interpreted as not fair or consistent or something. I don't know.
Okay. All right, great. Yes, those are definitely issues that we all think about when we're thinking about fair and consistent grading. Okay, thank you, Alicia. And then just to check in, you could put an emoji in the chat to represent how you're doing today, and that's just a little community building and a little bit of fun in there. So let's see how everybody's doing today. Depends on the time of the semester. You never know what you're going to get. Okay, all right. Yep, that looks like a very intelligent emoji there with the glasses and the smiler, everything. That's awesome. Okay. All right, awesome. Okay, thank you. And today we're going to be talking about aligning grades with your teaching philosophy, grading equitably, policies for late assignments, effective communication rubrics, and providing feedback, and to use these in a way that provides consistency, transparency, fairness, so that we can move toward equity in our grading. And one of the things that it's important to think about is your philosophy of teaching, and one way that you can work toward equity in your grading is to align it with the grading system with your teaching philosophy. And you might need to sit down and kind of articulate your teaching philosophy before you can decide on your grading philosophy. There are some online tools that can help you with that. And we're not going to cover that today. That's a different type of a workshop, but it is something that you want to think about when you're coming up with your grading philosophy. And things that you want to consider are, when you're aligning your grading system with your teaching philosophy, are what are the most important things that you want your grading system to accomplish for you? What are the most important things that you want your course grading system to accomplish for your students? What do the grades represent? For example, do the grades represent student mastery of established learning objectives? Or do they represent students' performance relative to their peers? And which one of those approaches do you think is more fair and consistent? And do you believe there's only a certain number of students who should be able to achieve an A in your course? Or do you believe in commending students' demonstration of learning by continuing to watch their progress and support their progress, and conferring that with the commensurate grade? And think about, could your grading policies possibly be contributing to equity gaps? And do you believe that student work should be assessed based on a certain set of criteria? Or do you believe student work should be assessed in terms of how it measures up to the work of other students? And that would be normative grading. Or how might your criterion grading be more equitable than normative grading if you're comparing it to other students? And do you believe that assessing grade penalties for late work and other actions, do you believe that's appropriate or not appropriate, and why? And how might this affect the grading equity in your courses? So just some broad things to think about. And in terms of students and grading for equity, students understand or believe that, there's a grade, there's a game, there's something they're trying to achieve. And some of them understand that grades aren't necessarily based on how well they understand something, but on how well they can play the game, or how well they can be successful under the system that's established as higher education. And so if you are familiar with the system, then you could be more successful at it because you're more familiar with how to navigate it. But does that necessarily indicate that you're more knowledgeable or proficient in a certain area of knowledge? So that's what Nick Sigmund says about the students are aware that school is a game, or that's a perspective that Nick Sigmund shares. And it's easy to get, Sigmund goes on and says that it's easy to get defensive about grading policies and about your ideas, but as a teacher, we want to believe that we're doing the right thing and that grades are meaningful, and that, each person wants to figure out a system of grading that makes sense to them and is fair and equitable and aligns with their philosophy of education. And Sigmund talks about how, in thinking about new grading practices, he had to be more thoughtful about it. And now his grades are meant to be more of an accurate reflection of students' mastery of standards set by the state and high school physics. So he's using high school physics standards as the criteria to grade the students. And if the students can display their knowledge of those standards without doing homework, then he said, well, they shouldn't be penalized if they didn't do the homework because they understand the concept. So that's something for you to consider in terms of how does that fit in with your teaching philosophy. And each person is going to have a different perspective of that, but it's an interesting perspective to consider. And some of the tips for grading for equity in this article that Sigmund wrote are grade by standards rather than by assignments. So if you're assessing whether students are meeting the standards or course objectives, rather than receiving points for simply completing an assignment. So did they show mastery on these activities or assignments, not just complete them? And then consider how you're using homework and extra credit in your process, and if it's meaningful, and if it really does reflect their knowledge of the content and the topics that they're trying to master in this particular course. And consider their behavioral management and mastery. And Bill Goldenberg was talking about piano, and so students might perform a certain piano piece on the piano, and then he or someone else would assess that based on certain standards. And Bill's talking about giving the students a rubric so that they know how they're going to be assessed. And that's great because they have the rubric, they know what the standards are. You're watching their behavior. How did they perform this piece? So that's great. And then think about if your grading practices might inadvertently punish students that have fewer resources, and that can be a challenge. It's very common now for students to make determinations about books that they're going to buy based upon the cost, courses that they're going to enroll in based upon the cost of the materials. And I've observed a number of classes and heard students talking about, they talk to other students, do we really need to buy this book? It costs so much money, things like that. So some of the things that you can do to address that so that the students that might not necessarily have the funding to buy the expensive books is find some open access resources for them, or put some resources on reserve at the library so that students all have access to the resources to support their success in the class, not just the ones that have maybe access to more funding or more scholarships or things like that. And so, going back to what the quote was saying is, consider what your goals are for the grading and student learning, and should the students' grades be based on how well they know something or how well they can just navigate the system of higher education, as Sigmund says, the quote game, unquote. And participation is something you hear people talk about. How are you grading on that? What are you considering? Some students are very engaged. They might not say a lot, but they're taking notes and their eye contact and all that kind of stuff. So how are you going to determine students' participation in the class? How many times are you going to let them resubmit or retake or revise work? You might have scaffolded instruction to allow students to submit a version of an assignment, a first version, and then provide feedback, and then they resubmit it, and they have incorporated those recommendations that you provided, and then their work in the subsequent submission or submissions should be better and should reflect a higher level of mastery. And then, if students are struggling, make sure there's systems to encourage them and continue to encourage them to learn rather than just earning a poor grade and then just saying, oh, I don't think I can learn this class. I think it's too hard. We want to make sure that we encourage students and let them know that we believe that they can continue to learn, and that helps them to believe that they can continue to learn as well. And it's really important, the positive energy that we as instructors communicate to students to keep them working and progressing, so that if they do have one low grade, that they don't just kind of check out of the class, that they know that they have opportunities to still succeed in the class. And there's different ways to address group work issues. You can have these peer grading systems, and there are different rubrics for that. Or you can have anonymous grading, where when you're looking at the submissions in Blackboard, you can have their names hidden so that there's not some kind of preconceived idea about a certain student earning a certain grade. You don't know whose paper is what or whose work is what. And then think about policies for late assignments. And it's interesting to hear discussions about this now. Sometimes people have very strict late assignment policies, and then there are some people who give, during the pandemic, and we still have a lot of issues with that, but there was, we would say give grace and allow for submissions, more flexible submissions. And if a student, maybe something comes up in their life and they can't submit something on time because of whatever came up. And so if they understand the material and they're competent on it and proficient, but they failed the particular assignment because they couldn't get it in on time, think about how that fits into your philosophy of teaching and learning. And does that make sense to you, that someone who's proficient and knowledgeable about a certain topic or discipline or whatever you're covering in class, does it make sense that they would fail because they couldn't get something in by a specific hard deadline? And think about what assumptions might be. Sometimes we don't realize what assumptions we're making about students that submit late work. And what we know about NIU students is that the demographics of our students, we have a lot of first generation students. We have a lot of students who are working and taking classes, and they might also be caring for other family members, commuting, all kinds of responsibilities. And so balancing all that in the late assignment policy, it's something to consider when you're deciding how to handle late assignments. Okay, so some things that you can do in terms of equitable late work policies is, how can the students request an extension? Can you implement an online form to standardize the process? I have small classes, so I just have the students email me, but if you have, you might want to put in some kind of more systematic process if you have larger classes and have some kind of online form, and what do they need to do to get this extension. You can have the philosophy of, I mean, I believe that people are, you know, telling the truth. And so if they say something happened, then I'm, going to trust that that's occurred, unless something has come up to indicate to me that that hasn't occurred. But instead of having, you could have them reflect on the assignment and why they need this extension, and whether it was in their power to solve this problem that they had that made them need the extension, so that it can help them in the future to get the assignments in on time. Or if it was something outside of their control, then that's a different situation. Or sometimes professors have a late pass or two that students can use as they choose throughout the semester. And they say, you know what, I just need to submit this late because something came up, and that gives them a pass to get that in on time and not be penalized. And some professors use more flexible due dates. And for instance, in my classes, the course is scaffolded, and they really do need to complete the assignments in a certain order because they build upon each other. So the lectures and assignments and everything go in a certain sequence, and if students need to submit something late, they still need to follow that same sequence, but they might just be behind on the deadlines a little bit. But they can also submit work early if they know something's going to come up. It's going to prevent them from meeting the deadlines down the road. And you could have students submit works in progress. Maybe you break up major assignments into smaller assignments to kind of guide them along the process. And that's definitely what I've done. I teach research proposal development courses, and I've taken that research proposal and broken it down into chunks, and they continue to work on it throughout the course and get feedback. And so it's a work in progress throughout the semester, as opposed to just having this huge project at the end. And if they, submit it late, it really has a detrimental effect on them. It's better for their learning, and they're more likely to succeed if it's chunked up and they're getting feedback along the way. And if they submit one or two chunks of that late, it's not going to have as detrimental effect on the grade as if there's just one big project at the end and they submit it late. Yes.
I'm sorry, may I interrupt you?
Sure, go ahead.
A question about that. So in the case where you have broken up the projects into pieces, let's say it's a major paper, and the first thing they need to do is let you know who their group is and what their topic is, and then later comes an outline and a methodology. Are you giving, I don't want to use the word grading, but let's say the overall project is worth 40% of your grade. Do you, when breaking this into these smaller little pieces, are you distributing that 40% over those pieces, or are they submitting those kinds of things to you primarily for feedback, but the majority of the weight is still going to come on to, let's say, the last paper or presentation? The participation in these other things is just to sort of make sure they're on the right track, or how are you doing that?
I take, when I chunk it up, the last project is worth so it wouldn't be worth 40% of the grade. it's worth a significant amount, but it's not 40 because those individual chunks, I mean, I want them to put the attention into it and realize that this is an important project. So there's ample points that they're going to pay attention and work on all of those. But if they bomb one of those, any of those, it's not going to totally tank
It's
their
not gonna
grade,
kill them.
But
Okay.
yeah, they get points for it, and it's enough to get their attention.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. Yes, and that feedback ongoing, that's consistent with the providing formative feedback, and it supports their learning, and the will hopefully in the end have higher quality work because they've been receiving feedback along the way. And then communicating your grading policies. We know communication is critical with students, and you want to make sure that it's clear and effective. And so it's transparent. And like Bill was talking about, the piano students, they have a rubric, so they know what either he's going to grade them on, or if another student's going to use the rubric to assess their performance, they know what they're going to be evaluated on. And I have rubrics for almost everything. And what I have seen is that when you write clear rubrics, students, you get less questions as an instructor, and students feel more comfortable because they know what the assignment is. The criteria for the assignment is clear. They know how it's going to be graded. And so they know how to write up or put this project together, this experiment or piano performance or whatever it is. So everybody's on the same page there, and it reduces their stress because they know going in how the assignments are going to be handled. So I'll post those in Blackboard, and if you're using Blackboard for an assignment submission, then you can put the rubrics with the assignment, and when you're looking at the assignment, you can use the rubrics to grade, and it's really a nice, efficient tool. Sometimes I'll use a checklist. I teach qualitative research, and one of the principles of qualitative research is that the researcher is an instrument in that process, and their life experiences and knowledge and biases and all of this has an impact on the research. And so researchers need to think about this and be aware of this. And so I have a biographical essay assignment. And for that assignment, I will have a checklist, which has, maybe a list of 10 different things that they're supposed to address in this informal essay. And I don't need that to be some kind of formal APA style paper, but they need to know what these 10 key components of it are. So I'll use a checklist, and then if they've hit all those points sufficiently, then they'll get full credit for the assignment. And so that's the difference between if you need to go into a full-blown rubric or if they just need to make sure that they've hit these main points. You can also have them do self-assessments. So, I used to do that as a student. I would just use the rubric and look at whatever my work was, and, kind of grade myself and say, okay, did I do this? Did I do that? Oh, I forgot that. I better go do that, or I get points taken off. So really, if they have a rubric or a checklist or some kind of a rating scale, they should be able to go in and do a self-assessment and know what their grade will be. If your grading is transparent and clear, that would be the ideal situation. And then, so on the screen, that's just one kind of a rubric. There's all kinds of different rubrics. You can provide feedback on different aspects of an assignment in different ways. You can prioritize. Sometimes if I was just talking to my husband about this with when you're working on a project that is maybe a semester long, or in the case of graduate school, years long, sometimes the feedback is almost like triage. So prioritize it at this early point of the project. It's really important that they get this research, the central research question identified, and then they get to some questions, and then later we'll work on the selecting the method of research and things like that. So there might be a reason you would prioritize. And then as they continue to work on this project, you might get more detailed, more descriptive. Constructive feedback, when you want to make sure that you're providing feedback that is going to be useful to the person, that they understand, that it's in a positive manner, in a way that they know it's not quite right, but maybe you provide a resource that they need to look at to get this more clear, that they're more correct on it the next time. You might tell them specifically they need to work on APA style, or they need to work on pacing in their piano performance, or something like that. Constructive and actionable. Actionable is, so you're providing specific examples of actions that they can take. So, say you did a great job on this, finding this original source. However, check the APA reference manual to make sure that you have the format correct in the reference page for this assignment, something like that. So they know, okay, so I did a great job finding this original resource, but I messed up the APA format. So I need to go look at that resource and get that straightened out for the next time. And it's also really important to provide timely feedback, because, if they get the feedback 3 weeks down the road, or, they've moved on, and the courses keep progressing. And so try to provide the feedback within the time frame that it gives them something that they can build their learning upon. It's not too far down the road from when they actually performed and created this assignment or conducted the performance, because it needs to be fresh enough in their mind that they can say, okay, that makes sense. So next time I submit this next part, I need to make sure I do X, Y, Z. But if it can be tricky if you have a lot of assignments to grade and a lot of students, but rubrics will help with that. And it helps you get higher quality work and more consistency as well. And so thinking about your current grading practices, what's something you might change, or what's something that you might consider in terms of your grading practices, and how you might think about tweaking them? Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
Being more timely with getting them feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a good one. Yeah, thank you. And that's another thing, when you're creating your courses and creating your curriculum plan for that course, try to spread out the assignments. Think about how they're going to come up. in your grading cycle so that you don't have like 2 major assignments that you have to grade within a short period of time, because that can build up and kind of get you behind, and it can build up for the students. So maybe you'll have a couple of formative assessments, and then maybe a larger, higher stakes assessment, and then a couple more formative ones, because you're keeping them learning. It gives you the opportunity to kind of do a higher stakes check throughout the semester, but you have to keep it so you can keep up with that sequence in the course too. And sometimes people don't think about that, but it works out better for both you and the students if you can think about that. Okay, and I have different resources that I will send along to you. And there's a set of rubrics from the American Association of College Professors, AAC&U, College and University Professors. And they have a set of rubrics that they had a task force a few years ago, and they came up with some rubrics on topics or competencies that are kind of difficult or people have difficulty assessing. And so I will send those along to you so that you can use those as examples. And they are they're Creative Commons usage, so you can adapt them to your needs, and people find those useful because like critical thinking is one of the competencies. I think another one is oral communication, maybe written communication, a few of those. And that can kind of give you an example of where to start, so you don't have to start from scratch. And I will send you the PowerPoint and the link to the recording as well. It'll take a little bit of time to process, but it'll be ready. Okay, does anybody have anything else that they would like to add before we finish up for today?